Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. This is a conversation with Kerry Phillipson, who is the retail product manager at Arriva Trains. It's a conversation about how to leverage AI for the travel and rail sector. Kerry discusses with us a proof of concept that they've been running, a virtual assistant to help people with their travel queries and travel challenges. And we discuss all kinds of things regarding how that project came about, what problems it's there to solve, how to go about trying to find the right kind of problems to solve to leverage AI rather than walking around with a hammer searching for a nail. We talk about the process that Kerry went through to create this proof of concept, and some really interesting insights here around personality design, which I know we've spoke about a number of times on the podcast in the past, or persona design, some of you conversation designers might be more familiar with. And the approach that Kerry took is a very interesting one. It reminds me a little bit of some of the work that we did in the Amazon Alexa days, which is really great. Kerry also shares with us a 4-step process and a 4-step framework to consider prioritizing use cases. That it covers things like value, vision, adoption, and risks. And we're going to get into what all of those mean and how you can use those 4 criteria to prioritize your own AI use cases within your organization. This is a very, very interesting conversation. You're going to learn a lot from it. This is Kerry Phillipson on VUX World. Kerry Phillipson, welcome to VUX World.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm excited today to talk about what we've been doing in Arriva with AI. Should
yeah.
be a good discussion.
It should be, indeed, yeah. I think Arriva is a company that has, I would say, lots of people know it. Very, very notable kind of like company that lots of people are aware of. And the travel sort of sector seems to be one of those areas that is ripe, if you like, for AI opportunities. Would you say so?
I mean, absolutely. I feel like transport in general there is so many opportunities when it comes to AI. I think if you look at just even like surfacing the right information at the right time for customers that are, doing complex journeys, or even maybe not even complex journeys, maybe even just really simple journeys. But things go wrong quite a lot within the railway. So it's really something that virtual assistants and all of that kind of assistant type stuff is really where we can use sort of AI as a tool to kind of help our passengers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a bit like the airline sort of kind of industry, isn't it? Where like things can go wrong that are not within your control, and that then
Exactly.
causes a big kind of influx, etc. And I imagine it's quite a sort of transient. Not you'll have regular stuff, obviously, but I imagine that sometimes there are situations where you have kind of like transient contact that then puts a lot of pressure on people and all that kind of stuff due to things that are just not within your control, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like even within our kind of contact centers, and that's really where, if there's a storm, for example, we try to predict these things, but we never quite know. Our contact centers get kind of overflowed with, calls from people not knowing what to do, or maybe they want refunds, or it might be all of that kind of stuff. But actually, instead of having to kind of sort of scale up our teams, if you like, it's more around being able to do these things more efficiently, and taking out kind of any of those repetitive sort of tasks, and actually using AI solutions to really kind of support that. And that's the sort of thing that we've been looking at over the last year on how can we utilize its technology in the right way, but also kind of spread sort of knowledge around the teams, both customers and staff as well, around this technology and how it's going to support them kind of going forward.
Nice, yeah. We'll definitely get into those experiments you've been doing for sure. So maybe it might be useful for our listeners. We have listeners kind of all over the place, really. Those in the UK will probably be familiar with Arriva Trains. Those in the US and further afield, perhaps not. So maybe we can start with, brief overview of Arriva Trains and your role at the organisation.
Yeah, sure. So my role is a retail product manager, and I have been working within Arriva for around 3 years now, but been in transport for 6. And within that, I work within the UK Trains division. So Arriva is essentially a transport company, but we operate in over 11 different countries. And we run around 500 trains and around 12,000 buses a year. So it's quite extensive. And then we have a range of different contracts within the UK. So we've got two national rail contracts, one being Chiltern Railways and Cross Country. We've got an open access operator, which is Grand Central, and then we also have Arriva Rail London as well. And then on top of that, we run kind of rail maintenance businesses too. So there's a big kind of spectrum of different kind of companies there. And then for my role in particular is more around kind of anything retail related, and that could be like kind of digital or even physical ticketing. And I kind of look at the whole end-to-end journey of that. So taking our products and seeing like where does that from start to finish. So from just at the starting point where you're searching for a journey, right to the end with the after sales support and all that kind of customer relation type stuff is where I sort of come in and oversee all of that. So it's quite an extensive role, and I think since this technology has kind of come to the forefront of everyone's minds, it's been really interesting for me because I've been able to think about how we do things a little bit differently.
Definitely. And you've got kind of a broad breadth of opportunities there as well, given that you're sort of involved in the entire customer journey. You've got kind of like,
Mm,
yeah, everything from search through to purchase through to support, the whole kind of, yeah, whole nine yards.
yep, absolutely.
Yeah. I didn't realize actually until must have been, it was not Monday just gone, but the Monday before, when I was on the train to London. I'm standing on the
Yeah.
platform in York, and the train pulls up. It's Grand Central. I just thought Grand Central
Yes.
was Grand Central, and all of a sudden it said Arriva on the side of it. I thought, how interesting is that? Yeah,
Yep, there you go.
yeah, that's mad. That's mad. Cool. That sounds great. So why don't we kind of begin then with you know the as we said, the opportunities are quite vast. But then at the same time, I think what organizations struggle with is really finding out a place to start.
Mm,
There's multiple trains of thought, and I think that some organizations are a little bit guilty of kind of like, well, what are we going to do about AI? And so now we've got a hammer. How are we going to find that nail, and what are we going to do to make sure we use this technology because we have to? Others have a different approach, which is let's find the problems that we have and seek to experiment to see whether AI can help us solve that. But still, you've got the problem, I suppose, if you want to call it that, of your business, like many businesses, does a lot of stuff, and the customer
mm.
journey is quite vast. How do you start from the perspective of where do we start if we want to utilize AI or just find problems that we have? Like, how do you approach the whole concept of like finding the best place to focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a challenge. It's been a difficult one. But I think over the last year, so when we first started looking at kind of how we could utilize this technology, we really did kind of just focus it down to some of the main kind of customer pain points that we have, rather than sort of looking at like trying to look at all of our processes at once. It was like, okay, where can we actually make a real difference from a customer perspective? So not even looking so much at our internal processes, but more about kind of supporting them better in a better way, which is why we went down the route of looking at creating kind of a travel assistant. And really, honestly, that kind of changed the game for Ariva in terms of like how we looked at AI. It sparked up those conversations around cybersecurity and how do we protect personal data, and how much is this going to cost to make, all those kind of things. Like, and it led to us creating a kind of AI strategy for the company. So we do have an AI strategy, but it is very, again, it's very a simplistic view, But I think that's kind of how we've approached it. Look at the customer pain points and then map that against kind of these 4 pillars that we've identified and see where it lands. And then if it is worth doing, then, we'll look into it and do it.
And what are those 4 pillars then? Is that what you're referencing there in
So,
terms of data security, or is it something
yeah.
else?
So, no. So we basically look at value, we look at vision and adoption, and then the risks. So I think at the start of the year, like the start of last year even, the kind of risk factor of doing something with AI was a lot higher than it is now. I think that's just mainly because of like education on this topic, and then also like the technology's really changed and grown, and more companies are kind of adopting it, and therefore it becomes like, oh, this isn't something that is, going to go away. This is actually something that's going to change things. So, we should start looking at this, and we really kind of put together a full sort of, risk matrix around what we're doing. So, for example, like in the travel assistant that we created, if you were looking at, well, someone might put in their personal data into this travel assistant because you can type in, a customer could type in anything they wanted, really. But, on the flip side of that, it's about us making sure that they're aware that they're talking to a virtual assistant and it's not like a human, and they shouldn't, pass any personal data through. So it's like a two-way thing. And I think that's where the kind of level of risk sort of changed. Um, and then we were looking at adoption, which again is quite a difficult thing to say that, oh, all of our customers are going to use this tool. I mean, that's just not going to be the case. I mean, you're going to have people at different levels in terms of technology as well. So, as a transport company, we kind of look at all generations will use our trains. So we have to make sure that we're kind of, meeting all of their sort of requirements, which can be quite tricky, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, we work with a lot of banks and stuff like that, and they've got a very similar problem, which is that even if they wanted to become like Monzo, which is just purely digital
Yeah.
first, it's just not the case, because especially with utilities as well, it's like you have to provide services to absolutely everyone, and
Yeah.
therefore you can't have a mandated kind of approach to how you do things, basically. But I'm interested to kind of step through these 4 areas. You mentioned risks and adoption there. What other kind of risk considerations did you have when you first started looking at leveraging AI? You mentioned their personal data. That's fair enough. You can't stop people from saying whatever they want to these kind of things. You can scrub PII and all that kind of stuff, and there's ways of mitigating it when it happens. Obviously, you want to prevent it happening in the first place if that's not the use case. But what other sort of like risk factors were you considering initially?
I think as well, kind of reputational risk. Um,
Mm.
when these things go wrong. The we couldn't have it that it was telling customers to go to the wrong station, for example, or it was, giving false information like that. That's quite a big, risk for us. So it was trying to kind of factor in how we would keep it so that it was, you know, essentially only looking at our libraries and our data rather than, got access to the internet, for example. So there's like lots of different AI models that we were kind of looking at, and we were thinking, well, we wouldn't really want something that was not, potentially could just look at the internet and pull out anything that that they wanted. It was more around making sure if our data, if we're confident that our data is correct, then actually that risk sort of lowers in terms of that, any kind of reputational damage that could happen in those sort of scenarios.
the approach to risk is fairly common because we've had
Mm.
some pretty terrible examples in the early days of ChatGPT,
Oh,
where
yeah.
when it comes to managing risk with DPD and Chrysler and all that kind of stuff, and then the kind of like adoption makes sense. You want to make sure that you're focusing on use cases that have got a chance of actually being used, and the more it gets used, the more value you get from it. So that kind of makes sense. You mentioned the other two was value and vision. What is
Yeah.
meant by vision? Is that yeah? What is meant by vision? How do you prioritize that?
So I think with vision, it's more around, how are we how are we going to better serve our customers? But then equally, how are we going to make sure that these models are commercially viable? So not just about kind of, looking at our overall kind of strategy, does it actually fit in with that in terms of the vision of the product? So, for example, the proof of concept for the travel assistant, the vision for that was to be able to give information to customers, um, 24/7 at the right time without without them having to do the legwork of finding this information in a very complex kind of transport industry that we work in. And you know, we have to kind of balance that with, well, how does that work in terms of the commercials around that? And, what does that mean with the value? Like, does the two things kind of marry up, the vision and the value? Because I think, there is a danger with these AI models that it can become very expensive. If you look at kind of the number of calls, the number of passengers that we have, if everyone was using that, then that could be, quite a expensive tool to use. But if it meant that actually the vision was actually being met, then, you know, we would kind of consider that. So I think that was really one of the important things to remain in the kind of four pillars was to have, the vision in there. Um, and we want to do things in an innovative way, we want to do things differently. I think in this industry as well, it's like, we have lots of regulations we have to adhere to, and we have to, connect into quite a lot of legacy systems as well. And sometimes that could stop innovation. So it's really kind of putting the vision at the forefront of things.
Mm. And how would you describe the vision that you have? Is it kind of because it sounds as though like you were saying there that obviously these things can be expensive to run,
Mm,
etc. And it's not always the case that the adoption of these tools necessarily displaces contact in other channels. Sometimes it's not like if you have 100,000 users of your chatbot, then all of a sudden you're going to have 100,000 less calls.
yeah.
Sometimes what actually happens is that you uncover demand by
Mm,
putting something in place that wasn't there previously, and all of a sudden now it gets used. And so it's not always the case that the cost will be offset by savings
yeah.
elsewhere. So how do you sort of like think about the vision that you have, that Arriva has, in terms of its leveraging of AI? How would you do? Yeah, what is that vision?
So I think at the moment we're really just in a kind of experimental phase with it, to be honest. Like we want to make sure that we do things carefully and obviously in the right way for both our staff and our customers. And I think that's where sort of the knowledge of these tools are really key. Um, but I think, we first and foremost, we want to serve our customers in the best way that we can. And, even through things like the contact center, now, we have very lean teams. We're not, we are dealing with a lot of calls in a month. So, having an AI tool that's attached to your kind of customer contact center that actually, could benefit both the customer and also staff as well. So it's sort of looking at It's looking at it as a helper, I think, is the main is our sort of main kind of point on the vision, is that we want to utilize this tool because we know that it is gonna be, it's going to be able to help us, um, in the future. It may be that, in 5 years' time, everyone expects this to be the norm, that we're just literally typing into assistants and chatbots or whatever. I want to book my travel, and it just goes off and does it. Like that might be our expectation in 5 years' time, with this technology. But at the moment, it is all about kind of it being a helper to, our processes that we've got currently.
Yeah, and that's the right way to think about it as well. Fundamentally, if you look at all of the technology revolutions, if you want to call it that have come previously, fundamentally all they've done really is they've all been productivity enhancers.
Mm,
That's kind of what they do, really. Like the internet is a productivity enhancer, mobile phones, the same thing. You go all the way, even from, horses to motor vehicles, etc. The whole thing is all about enhancing productivity and output. How is the sort of like, and we'll get into some of the details around the pilot and proof of concept and that in a second. I'm sure we've kind of teased into that quite a lot enough. But how is the organization responding to kind of like these experiments around kind of AI? Because there's two ways of that being received. Is one way of thinking about it is this is brilliant, it's going to help me in my day-to-day
mm,
job and it's going to be fantastic.
yeah.
The other way of thinking about it is that this is a threat to me and it's going to replace me and therefore I don't want to go anywhere near it.
So I don't think there is a fear of anyone being replaced. That's like kind of I don't that's not really come up, to be honest. I think that it's more I think people understand that because we're quite lean teams anyway, like I feel like, there's definitely enough work to go around, including if there was an AI assistant doing half of it for me. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't think there's necessarily a worry in that sense. And because we are looking at doing this in a slow manner, we're not like gonna suddenly change everything at once, that people are more accepting of the technology. I do think that with this that there is skepticism, and it's quite clear that there's lots of different kind of gaps in people's like either knowledge of what it is, and their day-to-day use of it as well. You've got some people in the team that will use ChatGPT, or they use, Copilot in their day-to-day lives. And then you've got others that haven't ever even looked at it or touched it. So then when you're kind of showing them a tool that can write a document for you, that comes with skepticism, because they're like, well, this is the wrong answer, or this doesn't work. That comes up a lot, oh, it doesn't work. There's no point in AI doesn't work, you know. But I think it's that blanket statement, right? Of like just calling anything that has uh AI in the title is just like they just assume that AI doesn't work. But it's not that. It will be lots of different things and different products that you're using. So it's it's not that AI doesn't work. It might be that that particular product doesn't work for what you're trying to use it for.
Mm,
And that's really where I've kind of been trying to help to explain some of these things, to our staff and our customers as well, like around this is it, this is what this is going to do. This is the job that it's trying to do. It's not trying to solve everything. And kind of, looking at it from that perspective.
yeah, I think
Um,
the other kind of there's two sort of, I suppose, trains of thought there. One is that, and this happened in 2017, 2018, when we were building rule-based chatbots and stuff like that, is that organizations try to build a chatbot David Lowe, ex-BBC, Skyscanner, Amazon Alexa, etc., used to always say, and I've mentioned this on a recent podcast as well, and I still think that's true today, which is that you will always build your first bot twice. And that's just the way that it is, because the first one is the learning curve. You're cutting your teeth, you don't know what you're doing, you're playing around, and all of a sudden you arrive at something that kind of works, but not necessarily, and you need to then improve it. Or the second time you do it, you know a lot more about it, you're a lot more skilled, you've developed some capabilities and maturity, and you're away with it. And the risk is that even in 2018, for those teams and companies that were building NLU-based chatbots, they launch it. It's the first time they've ever done it, so it's not going to be very good. And the results are subpar, because it's bound to be, because it hasn't been designed very well. And then the sentiment is that this thing just doesn't work. Chatbots just don't work. Whereas that's never actually been the case. It's been the case definitely that many chatbots have been very poorly executed, but it's not necessarily the case that chatbots don't work. And I think the same thing is kind of the case with generative AI, which is that either it's, tried and doesn't necessarily have the expected results, but that's not necessarily the technology problem, as you've said. There's many other things it could be. But the other kind of thing is the kind of inverse of that, which is the expectation that this thing should be absolutely amazing, and that anything less than perfection is not tolerated. And therefore, when you have that kind of expectation and it doesn't quite do what you want it to do, there's that kind of like, well, this whole thing's useless, so it's difficult to get the balance.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. And, I've had a lot of examples where I've been kind of showing people what we're doing and all that sort of stuff. And there is like a real need to try and break it. Like, asking obscure questions that, quite frankly, that like it's not going to be able to answer that, But then it's like, oh, well, look, see, it doesn't work. And I think that's really the learning around it, is that, it's especially with chatbots in general. I think a lot of people that I've spoken to about chatbots have been like, I hate chatbots. I hate them. Like, I will literally write, I want to talk to a human. I want to talk to a human until I talk to a human. And I just thought that was really funny, because I thought, you know what, it'd be hilarious if you actually weren't directed to a human and you were actually directed to an AI assistant, because some of them are very human-like,
Yeah. I mean, that's the case. The reason for that mostly is because, as I mentioned, most chatbots in the past have been just very poorly designed and very poorly executed, and therefore it creates the expectation that these things don't work, and all I really want to do is speak to a human, and I won't stand for anything less. And that's where the value of generative AI stands, really, because if it's good at anything in an enterprise context in terms of handling interactions with customers, it's good at handling the messiness of language and understanding language, which is traditionally the challenging part for machine learning systems. It won't understand everything. So it's interesting. I wonder whether those same people that have those expectations with chatbots will still have those expectations in a few years' time, when the existing round of chatbots have kind of been improved,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I feel like, I think that will it will rapidly change in the next year or so. These things will become really, really good, where you won't actually know that you're talking to essentially a bot or a generative AI. You won't know that. It will literally be a seamless experience, is what I personally think. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, the reality is, it doesn't necessarily matter greatly, really. I mean, the thing that you're finding in terms of like when people are testing it and they're trying to break it, and that's good, because you want that. You want someone to kick the tires and try and break it. But the question is, like, how representative is that of an average user? Like, the reality is that the average user for Arriva trains is not going to be asking questions about the weather or the football scores or whatever it might be, unless they're trying to specifically break it, which is the fringe kind of like edge expert use cases where they're just trying to piss people, they're trying to break it, basically. But an average customer is going to stick to your domain. It's going to stick to the use case, because that's their needs. They come into the interaction with their needs, and the job firstly is to understand what they are, and then to try and help them solve it. So I think that whether people believe that it's a person or an AI, sometimes it might be helpful for them to believe it is an AI, because then at least there's a degree of tolerance, where if it doesn't get something quite right, then it's more, people are essentially more forgiving. But I do think you're right that the experiences, generally speaking, are going to improve. And you can see that with, every chatbot that's had some degree of improvement with generative AI, even if it's just in a relatively low risk area where maybe
Mm.
the NLU system doesn't understand something, and therefore it devolves down to a retrieval augmented generation system to see if they can mop up any of the slack. That use case is proven tremendously useful for NLU based chatbots. And so I think you're right that the generative AI infused in those customer interactions is going to make things far better. Whether it's passing off as human, I don't know, but it's going to definitely make them far, far better.
Absolutely.
So, what? Tell us about the proof of concept that you did. Then you mentioned the virtual assistant, this travel assistant. Like, talk us through a little bit in terms of like, where did that come from? What does it look like? How does it work? And generally, kind of like, yeah, what the project involved.
Yeah, so I mean, really, this was kind of our first sort of stab at using kind of this technology. I mean, it was sort of last year that we launched it, and we've been kind of looking at how we can kind of move it into a real sort of MVP, if you like, over the last couple of months. But I mean, the whole idea around it was that we get lots of calls around from our customer contact center. Um, our FAQ pages on our website. We've got there's so much information around kind of travel in general, and actually bringing it into one place where you can ask for any travel information, and help with like journey planning and things like that would be really, really useful. Um, and one of the things that I kind of really wanted was for it to not be just a general, like a normal kind of chatbot, but actually to have like a kind of a human-like feel as you would do, like kind of speaking to station staff. Um, and that was sort of where it was born. It was sort of like, it's a good idea. Let's see if we can and get it into a kind of proof of concept stage. And I guess because it was so early on in our kind of journey with all of this that we didn't particularly have too many design principles, to be honest.
Mm.
It was very much sort of, okay, let's look at the core user stories. These are the things that we would like it to do. Um, and we just went from there, really. And to be honest, it was more around kind of like me working with the supplier and understand and getting it to understand tone of voice. So tone
Mm.
of voice was like really important to me. Like I felt like it needed to understand that because that is one of the frustrations that people get from, just your usual kind of chatbots. So I really wanted it to sort of know when a customer was angry or when a customer was, just looking for some, trip advice and wanted to know, oh, where can I go tomorrow for £60? And it to give them some, nice kind of options for that. So yeah, that's where it really kind of came from.
Mm. And what was the kind of like need around understanding the frustration part? Did you treat those conversations differently?
Yeah. So what we did is we made it like it's very personable. It's like it is very kind of, it's like how exciting. This is great, amazing. And it says all these things. It even has little jokes in there as well. It was like, it's got character.
Mm.
And I remember saying to the developers, like, I want it to have more character. And they'd be like, what do you mean? It was very kind of like, um specific in what it was saying at first, but I was like, no, we want it to be like a fun thing for someone to interact with. Like they want to, speak to this bot. And then and then but then we realized, well, actually, sometimes you don't want a happy answer. You don't want someone responding, that's great. I'm so glad that your train was cancelled. You know, you want it to say, I'm really sorry to hear that. Here's the information to apply for a refund or whatever it might be. Um, and and all of that. So we kind of did a lot of work around how, how it kind of interacts with tone of voice.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that is interesting there, because you'd expect kind of like the super personable type of experiences to come from, I suppose, brands that would be more, I don't want to use the word tongue in cheek, but like, for example, like, I remember Domino's Alexa skill years ago. It was
Mm.
like very much like everything it said was a pun. It was like,
Well,
if you,
it's not as bad as that,
I
trust
know,
me.
no, no, of course not. No, no, I'm not suggesting it is, but like you kind of would expect it, because Domino's are a bit like that, which is like, if you say I want to order a pizza, it'd be like, holy pepperoni, let's get this going. Whereas like, so like, but a lot of the other sort of like, AI assistants that come from most industries all tend to be a little bit along the lines of like, I don't know, they are fairly straight down the middle. We have this
Yeah.
personality design canvas, and every time we run workshops on that, every kind of team always really kind of centers on something very similar. So, like, I could design the personality for, you name the brand, and I'll be able to design the AI assistant personality for it, because I know exactly what it's going to be like, and it's always very similar. It's always sort of like straight down the middle. So, it takes a bit of confidence to be able to inject more personality, which can be perceived as important, because ultimately all you have in this interaction is the language that you're using. And your
Yeah.
goal is to keep the user engaged sufficiently enough for their issue to be resolved, so they don't leave that channel and go and do something else. So it's really important that you can keep them in the conversation, keep them engaged, keep them progressing, and solve their need. And there's an argument to say that infusing personality into the assistant can do that, because it helps with people's mental model of, okay, this is a conversation with a thing that can have a
Yeah.
conversation with me like a human. So what was the sort of like process or like reaction internally to that? Because I mean, if someone was to say Arriva Trains design the personality for that, you probably wouldn't make it
No.
as personable. So like, I'm just
No.
curious about your your thought process there.
I think whenever I show it, I think because I was really trying to make it so that it was like the interaction that you would have at station, rather than it being the interaction that you would have like within our digital platforms, for example. Like that, I think that's why I really wanted to inject some personality, because it was more around, well, how would we expect our station staff, for example, to interact with our customers? We wouldn't expect them to be like, yes, please, can you go here? Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, you have some kind of conversation around that. And that's really kind of where my thinking was. And whenever I've sort of presented it, I think we're quite forward thinking in that space. Like, we want people to want to interact with us. So we're not, um I think everyone was quite kind of happy with how it kind of turned out. And actually, if you look at, it always makes people smile whenever I do the demo. The smile, like, people smile because you can, when from reading it and seeing it, it's like, oh, this actually is quite cool, is what the response is, rather than it being, okay, this is, the normal sort of chatbot. And I think, as well as looking at it from a product perspective of like, let's do something completely different that's not out there at the moment. Let's not make it the same as all the other chatbots are there, because we could do that, but let's try and make this a bit different. So, and it gives a great little thing. So I typed into it once, I want to go to the moon, to see what it said, and it came back with a really nice little message, like, you know, um, although that sounds like an amazing adventure, we need to direct you to something more terrestrial, or whatever. So it was really cute, and again, like, that sort of nice interaction. If you looking at who would potentially be more likely to use that bot as well. From a generational point of view, they probably would prefer it to be a bit more sort of, in that not as kind of rigid as the usual sort of chatbots.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible approach because I think that maybe the mistake that some companies make is that they try and create the brand voice, you know,
Mm,
and so it's a bit like you were saying there. Your digital channels, they are infused with your brand voice. The colors, the tones, the fonts, the language. It's all part of your brand package, and I think that often the approach to creating these virtual assistants is to almost create the ultimate brand voice.
mm,
And really, what that really means is, well, passes all your brand guidelines and we'll make a personality out of it. Whereas what that's probably going to end up with is what is out there predominantly at the moment, which is a lot of kind of straight down the middle, very
yeah.
similar personalities that are not really personalities in a sense. Whereas I think that the approach of focusing on trying to recreate a character
Mm,
is a very interesting one. Like when we used to design Alexa skills, we used to have that kind of approach. Like for example, we did an Alexa skill for the post office, and it was all about Christmas delivery check-in. So like, when is the last time that I can send a parcel for delivery at Christmas? And in there, we had like, as soon as you start the skill, the sound that you would hear would be the sorting office. It was almost like you were walking into the sorting office and that
that's
would be
so
the sound.
cool.
Yeah, that's the sound. And then like the voice that's talking to you and all that kind of stuff, it's like you're in there and you're asking, okay, when was the last time I can send my parcel? And then it'll tell you. And so it's all about creating that experience and using things that would help people recognize what's going on and make it more engaging and experiential. Then I think in the sort of chatbot world and the AI assistant world and stuff like that, I think that maybe things have swung, the pendulum has swung all the way towards it's got to sound like the brand. That
Mm.
Alexa skill didn't sound like the Royal Mail, but it sounded pretty good and it was really engaging and it was fun. So I think that approach of saying, well, let's base it on a character like someone who you would run into on the station, I think is
Mm.
a really interesting way of approaching it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we're kind of working on putting it into, creating an MVP product. Um, and we're actually showcasing it at Transport Ticketing Global, I think next week. So it'll be really interesting to see like how, people kind of react to that style, I guess.
Mm. And how was it? How does it function? Is it the use cases are things around like journey planning and
Yeah.
stuff like that? Yeah. And so, how did you approach I mean, you referenced a supplier early on, so obviously it sounds as though this has kind of been an outsourced kind of venture. So I don't know how much kind of information you have or can share in terms of the some of the behind the scenes stuff, but like how is it kind of created? Is it doing anything as in like it's not obviously booking tickets, but is it doing anything transactional like that? Or is it all predominantly information based? Like it's a big retrieval augmented generation system, or how is it actually functioning, so to speak?
Yeah, so it is connected to the Silver Out Iptis data, which is essentially the journey planning data. So what happens is that if you kind of ask it a question around, I want to go to York at 9 o'clock or whatever, and it will retrieve back that information. For the proof of concept, we didn't kind of connect it into obviously like booking a ticket or anything like that. But that would definitely be like the long term kind of goal with this, is that it could become that one stop shop where you literally does your journey planning and it says, "Oh, Kerry, do you want to book this ticket?" And I say yes, and it just literally sends me back the ticket. That would be the dream.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of like where we would like to take it in the future, is having that and the same with like, um for like delay repay or for refunds, is that you could just say, I my train was delayed. Okay, that's fine. Send your details off to the respective talk or whatever it might be. And you just get the confirmation that that is going to be paid. I mean, it's like to have that kind of seamless experience. And I think that we're going to see more and more of that, um, over the coming years. But that's really kind of our thinking around this is literally just the start of what this could become. And, probably in 5 years, we probably won't even be really interacting with websites that much, you know? Um, it'll be more around kind of, we'll be so used to using kind of these generative AI type conversations we'll be having. We won't necessarily be kind of searching for a website and having a look for that. We'll be using one tool probably, or a multiple of tools, but we'll all have our own preferences on tools, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's the nature of AI fundamentally, is that it will change our perspectives on how we use computers.
Mm,
Basically, the whole human computer interaction paradigm changes, and what kind of websites and apps do is they force you into this kind of like um navigation based interaction, which is, I've got to learn the information architecture, I've got to know where I want to go, I've got to first of all know what I'm trying to accomplish, and then figure out what the steps are in order to accomplish it. Whereas the value of AI essentially is it's outcome based, it's intent based. You just tell it what you want, and it should be
yeah.
doing the work behind the scenes to help you figure that out. And so and to be fair, that's always been the case, and that's always been the value. It's just that, what NLU systems or traditional machine learning systems did fairly well, I would say, is process automation. So the stuff around buying tickets and
Yeah.
stuff around issuing refunds and all that kind of stuff, actually that technology is still pretty sound, and I would probably arguably recommend using a version of that, or at least incorporating that stuff in the transactional stuff. What it didn't really do is the stuff before the transaction was the information-based stuff, and it couldn't really classify what your intent was or the outcome you were looking for because of the restrictions of the model. So I think that a combination of those two things is where it's going to end up being. And then if you kind of believe where it's heading, which I have done for a long time, is that kind of ambient computing layer where maybe it's ChatGPT, maybe it's Gemini, maybe it's some version of Alexa or Siri or whatever it might be, but some single entry point into everything you need to get done.
Mm,
And for a company like Arriva, you've got your assistant. Either that assistant will be talking to other assistants, or the
yeah.
APIs behind it will be exposed and authenticated through my own personal thing. Therefore, the reliance on websites and apps certainly potentially declines. And then you can go even further than that if you look at, Satya Nadella and the way that he explains the where he thinks it's going for Microsoft, is that fundamentally every single piece of software that Microsoft has is basically a database with code, and generative AI, the better it gets at coding, then the less of a need there even is for those applications in the first place. And so the question now from 2025 is kind of like, what's the future of SaaS itself? And if the future of SaaS is in question, then also the future of how businesses provide services to customers surely must be in question, because
Yeah.
business applications are a version of a SaaS application only provided to end users rather than somewhere else. So it's kind of, very interesting times that we're living in right now.
Absolutely. We'll have to see how it all goes.
Yeah. And let's maybe do this again when you're a bit further forward, and you've got some sort of results or what have you to share with us and all that kind of stuff. We'd definitely be interested in tracking the journey and seeing where it goes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Absolute pleasure. Real pleasure. Thank you for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Bye.
See you soon, and thank you all for joining and tuning in, and we'll see you again on the next one. See you soon. Bye now.